Good afternoon and welcome. As you know, today we're going to be talking about the future of TV, specifically streaming video and over-the-top, although my guess is we'll probably wander into mobile a little bit as well. But we're going to be talking about it specifically from the user's perspective, from a user experience perspective. With the disaggregation of content, and obviously with the or the advent of internet video and streaming technologies and app ecosystems, there's virtually an infinite amount of content available to people, but that creates a number of ramifications for user experience. How do you create a user experience for the infinite? You know, it's a very difficult problem. So a few areas we're going to focus on today, just to kind of get your thinking caps going for questions, is first discovery. How do we help people discover content and get to the content that they want quickly? Two is just app development generally. It's very hard to create good apps, but creating them across so many platforms and then creating a consistent user experience for folks is a challenge for sure. And then third, around pricing generally. So you have AVOD and SVOD and skinny bundles and micro subscriptions. From a user's perspective, how do we improve that and make it easy for people to figure out, okay, out of all this content that's available, how do I select the content I want and how do I pay for it and get it? So I think we have a great group of panelists here today. We have backgrounds in content acquisition and product management, product development, user experience, and some of the top companies in the space with representation on device manufacturers and software vendors and publishers. So I feel like with your participation, we should have a really good, well-rounded discussion on the topic. I'll reserve 10 minutes or so at the end for questions, but if you have questions when we're on a topic and you want to get that question out before we move on to the next topic, feel free to get my attention and throw something at me and we'll make sure we get your question answered. So first, before we get started, introductions. My name is Keith Valory. I'm the CEO of Plex. Plex is a streaming media app that allows people to organize their own content libraries together with recorded TV and movies and a growing number of online content sources as well, and then stream that to virtually every device. We have millions of customers around the world. We're in the top 10 to 15 most watched apps on most platforms. I checked, we were number 11 this morning on Roku, so that's good. And really our mission in life is to empower our users to personalize their own media experience and not be kind of subject to a one-size-fits-all model. That's obviously just one way of doing it, and I'm sure we'll discuss others today. But this topic is obviously near and dear to my heart. So, Will.
Hi. My name is Will True. I lead product development, strategy, and design for TV apps at Vimeo. Prior to that, led product development for mobile and TV at the organization behind TED Talks and TED.com. If you're not familiar with Vimeo, started 12 years ago as a platform for creators to upload, share, and now sell their videos throughout the internet. We now have 240 million monthly viewers and over 50,000 titles for sale on Vimeo.
Good afternoon, I'm Bernardo Duarte. I'm Director of Content Acquisition at Roku. And previous to that, I was working at networks, Fox and Univision. Roku is the #1 streaming device in the country. We have over 14 million users, active users monthly, and that's a 40% year-to-year growth from over time, right? And you know, it's great to be able to talk about these topics now because, especially for somebody like me coming from the traditional backgrounds, seeing the proliferation of streaming occurring. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Moretz Kimball. I run product for the NBC News Group. That is MSNBC, all the NBC show brands, as well as Today Digital, which is kind of its own brand. I oversee product and design, and I'm right in the middle of the wonderful mess that is cable, broadcast, and digital, which is really exciting, and you know, keen to hear your questions.
Hi, I'm Drake Martinet. I run the product and engineering groups at Vice Media. Our group spans all of Vice's various businesses, covering our digital channels, our television channels around the world, so Viceland here in the U.S. as well as abroad, and you know, depending upon the market, varying degrees of engagement there, and then several of our emerging businesses, which we're excited to talk about soon, but it also encompasses OTT.
Awesome. So let's get started. We'll talk about discovery first. So a recent study said that a certain very large streaming content app, their users spent more than twice as much time searching for content than a traditional someone searching on traditional cable for something to watch. And so I think that that problem is getting worse. Most agree that the discovery problem is getting worse. So I think the general unfair question for you guys is, what are those challenges, and then generally speaking, what are your companies doing about it? We'll start with you, Will.
Yeah, I mean, it's the paradox of choice, kind of as more and more applications become available and more content becomes available on those applications. Finding the right piece of content to deliver to a user at the right time, whether they're looking for something particular or just generically searching, becomes harder and harder. We have kind of a unique challenge with it, because we also have a mix of user-generated content in with original content. So we both have the incredible depth of original content, which some is absolutely incredible, and some of it is kind of the cell phone videos you'd expect to see on a UGC platform. Elevating the right piece of content to a user at the right time is really a problem that we puzzle over constantly. The approach we've taken that we really are quite excited about is focused on actually custom curation. So we have human curators pulling out some of the best of the content through our Staff Picks channel, which is over 10,000 videos handpicked by our curators, and also then providing context around those videos. So we want to make sure that if a user sees a curated channel presented to them in our interfaces, that they understand why they're seeing that video. They may not recognize the thumbnail or the creator or the title. This isn't Guardians of the Galaxy. It might be a 12-minute short, be it animated or drama or anything really. But actually want to make sure that the user understands what it is that they're seeing, why they're seeing it, and why an individual at Vimeo thought it was worth presenting to them.
And how do you do that? Like, how does the user, is there some tagging or something that makes it clear to the user?
So we're exploring that in particular, kind of providing recommendations on an individual level of kind of like that video store, like the recommendation from a knowledgeable source. But for the start, what we're looking at is creating subsets of content, kind of channels or collections of content, and titling it appropriately. So it might be something for, if Tribeca Festival is happening, we'll have a short list of videos that are either selected at Tribeca or participated in creators that are selected in the festivals. And so we're always trying to keep things both temporally and relevant to kind of what's going on in events around the world, but also just creating groupings of content that make sense to present together.
Thank you, Bernarda.
Yeah, so Roku has over 5,000 channels, right? So it's a pretty challenging environment if you are, a smaller brand or niche content. And what's unique about Roku, and I think one of the reasons that the company has been very successful, and we get great reviews both from users and also from the industry experts, is because Roku has a very neutral approach to search. And by neutral, I mean when a user searches for a piece of content, whether that's the title or you have the name of the actor or any sort of keyword per se within them, you will find that the search tool will give you results that are pretty much ordered by price, right? So from zero or least expensive to most expensive. And it will direct you to within there too, the apps that you are already actively using, or to the subscription that you may have that you didn't remember that you have, so that you have the access to the content for free already, right? So it really allows the user to shop broadly. We also are agnostic in terms of, obviously we have Google Play, and we also have the Amazon Video app on the platform, so we're not pointing you to just one channel store just to come and purchase from Roku. We're giving you all the broad choices that are in the ecosystem. We actively work on the algorithm so that it will be as responsive as it needs to as the platform continues to grow. And I think our users, like I said, really enjoy that part of the platform. Once you've uncovered the piece of content or you found it, you activate the release of either the app, or if you've already downloaded the app, then the content will start. We also allow allow users to search obviously within channels, right? So if you're using Netflix or if you're using Hulu, those individual apps can be searchable within that, their ecosystem as well.
So for NBC, I think the key strength is talent and show brands. So, there's many decades, 70 years of history to some of the shows like Nightly or Today. And the core audience and the core kind of user flow is really, I just want to watch the Nightly News, so I want to watch the Today Show. And so that discovery obviously really, really helps us. People come, they have an end in mind, they really know what they're coming for. And without much effort, we end up being a top destination on OTT, and our shows do extremely well there. The problem is that these shows, they have multiple different distribution agreements and restrictions. If they're part of cable, they're part of a TV environment. If they're part of the network shows, there will be time or location windows. And I think the hardest part in this new environment is for the user, it's not obvious why something would be accessible and something wouldn't be. And there's a lot of inside the building and inside the industry kind of views on why things are the way they are. And I think my challenge from a kind of product and user experience design is how do we kind of guide a user through that? Because obviously, these restrictions exist for good reason. There are billions of dollars worth of contracts, and the industry will simply not adopt as quickly as technology. And so we're really thinking hard, and we haven't done anything public yet, but we're working on sort of a longer plan to better put things in one place and make it more straightforward to access things, while respecting a lot of these contractual relationships and partners that are hugely important to us.
Is that a time-bound problem? Like when you guys look at this, do you see okay, 5 to 10 or 5 years from now, a lot of these restrictions will be loosened because everybody knows that we want to move towards the OTT platform or kind of a streaming platform? Or is it, nope, we kind of, that's the foreseeable future, we're stuck with that, and so we have to work around it?
I'm not close enough to these contracts to really say that, but I think it's a mix of both. In the sense of local, for example, that might continue to be something that you want to enforce because of the local TV businesses and the local ad markets and the local targeting. So, maybe those things never go fully away. But certainly for cable relationships and as things get rebundled, yeah. Perhaps it's a time.
Okay. Great.
So, I mean, Vice has the same problems, but exactly the opposite. We're into television for the first time. We're taking on some of these agreements now, and having that be a necessary complication on our previously pure digital lives. And so I think we're in a position now where we can take advantage of a lot of the work that everyone's doing and saying, look, we want to go the same direction. We're in many cases making some of these agreements for the first time, but also like you, I'm half a degree removed from the conversation. I think that the only thing I can add, because I agree with everybody here, we're sort of solving through search, solving through user experience, and with a dearth of choice across the board. But for Vice, it's always thinking about our given user's reference frame. Who is this user? And trying to envision what the content that we can offer them based on contracts or based on region or based on preference, given that user's path. There are some things we do now that try and present a user with what's contextually appropriate for them based on the channel, based on the way they came in, because Vice is sort of a collection digitally of these sub-brands that are based around passion points. And in the places where we bring all of our video together, we also do sort of themed collections and a lot of human curation, because our brand is very focused on avoiding being total objectors to the concept of a filter bubble. That we feel the time when Vice is best is when you're seeing multiple perspectives on an issue that you didn't realize was the issue at the core of all these same things that are affecting your life or the society around you. So we try and bring multiple things together. We're not suspicious of algorithms in any way. But we want to keep things human flavored, have delight and surprise be a big part of it.
So is there a human curation element to?
Today there's a very strong human curation element if you were to sort of rank it in terms of the other kinds of curation we do. But I think it gets into, Spike Jones said it about our channels. When you watch a lot of our things, there's a real chance you might see something you've never seen before. And you can't say that for all the video that's on the internet and the boxes that pipe it into your house. And we want to maintain that. It's part of the value we drive. So that covers user experience, that covers how we choose to group things, and thinking about the user's reference frame, doing our best to see, what will make sense to a given user and try not to complicate their lives with, our deals.
Do you guys worry about metrics like time spent searching, or is it more of let's just be pure about getting the right content? If it takes a little bit longer to find content because we gave them the right content, what's the priority there?
I mean, searching is one mode of discovery, and I think depending upon the platform, it's either a dominant mode of discovery or a secondary mode of discovery. And so for me, again, I think about user path and user journey. So I think more time spent discovering can be time spent interacting with other content, or you got to a video through many other things that Vice does. Mm-hmm. That can be great for us and great for our business. But we just made a massive refresh of our presence on Roku. We're super happy with it. Thank you. Mm-hmm. And on that platform, because it's a norm of that platform, because that's the user's reference frame, of course we'd want to see that and say, okay, we're not doing doing everything we can to make it easy to search, or we're not showing up correctly, or hey, let's throw a wrench in the works and try and surface some things that don't have to do with what they searched. It matters, but it matters based on what the user's doing.
Mm-hmm. All right, so moving on to apps generally. So you hear a lot of content providers talk, the words I hear a lot is kind of a tailored experience or immersive experience for the content, helps with building brand. I think there's some apps do it really, really well, some apps do it really, really poorly. But I think one thing that's true kind of across the board is there is an inconsistency. Even when you adopt the idioms on a Roku, for example, there's an inconsistency between user experiences and apps, and it creates kind of an app fatigue for users generally. And so I think, and maybe starting with the product development guys at the end, it's what are the challenges you see in developing good, strong apps across the board for not just one platform, but lots of platforms. And then how do you kind of help the user, right? You talked about user paths. How do you kind of help them adopt your framework and your user experience, knowing that they're adopting a bunch of others as well?
I think of the decision for me is made in two distinct buckets. One is economic, and one is user experience focused. The economic argument is just as hard as the user experience argument. The economic argument is how can we effectively and efficiently bring an experience to this platform, have it be an experience that we're proud of, whether it's something we spend all our time on or is a portion of that. How can we architect ourselves and our systems in a way to make that possible and keep those costs low? Those are business considerations of product, for some of them, the answers are clear. For some of them, less clear. I think that, for instance, we at Vice invested a lot in a core API architecture and a video serving architecture that allows us to spin up front-end experiences much less expensively than others maybe, and that helps us have options. So that's a business decision that affects what we might be able to offer people. On the user experience end, Jesus, it's just it's a hydra of problems. Every platform, multiple different norms, and again, getting back to the user, what a user expects from your brand on Roku, given the Roku environment, is different. Should be different, because you want to serve that user in that place. Yeah. I have it easy. Vice forever has been a visually distinct brand. It has a strong brand presence that's built on strong visuals and strong content visuals, and that leads for us. That means that the way we take our images, our show posters, the things that we can carry and serve, regardless of, if we're not designing the user interface, you look at that stuff and you don't mistake that it's Vice. It's certainly Vice content if it's in there. And that makes my job easier on that end. It means that if we show up in Roku, you know it's our content. You know, and then when it's a first-party thing, yeah, we work very hard to make sure brand's consistent across user experiences. The mantra internally is, you know, all of our users across, you know, any of our passion points should have to learn how to use Vice once, even if they are going to traverse our multiple brands. And that's, you know, some days we win, some days we don't, but that's how we think about it.
So I'll start the other way around. So from the user experience perspective, what is learn Vice once for us is the news agenda. And we also really believe in human curation and the fact that us as a news organization, really our job is to not ignore algorithms and personalization and data signals, but at the end of the day, we have a hand at the steering wheel and we really we make decisions about what we want to say is the news and that sets the agenda. So we see this as a service, as something that needs to be unique about us. So we very much, and it's sort of like a little bit in the future because we're in the process of rebuilding everything, every website, every app. So you know, bear with me, it's a little bit slideware right now, but you know, we think about a new OTT experience, which would be cross-platform, that maybe, you know, doesn't require any choices in the beginning, like at least for the first few minutes, right? So because we set the agenda, we say with certain context, certain times of the day, for certain people, you know, what is it that you would want to know right now? And we reduce the friction for the next hop. So the next hop might be, okay, I want to explore a show or a talent or, you know, a particular topic or something, but I want to get away from search and scrolling through playlists as discovery, and very much start with what's the news and how to make that specific to a context. In terms of the economic cost, we're also, you know, we are in a decoupled architecture, so we are API first. So we have all the back-end pieces. We still have a lot of work to do on the client side, and I'm not so afraid of, you know, addressing the platforms individually. I mean, it's half a dozen, so I think it's manageable. And it's such a growth area for us that I'm not afraid really of investing in that sense. I think it's actually, again, to the point of inside the building, like so much gets spent in terms of labor and attention on web. And so little on something like OTT. If anything, like my job is to, you know, shift the organization and refocus them on some of these growth areas away from being so centric for, you know, what everyone looks at work because they're in front of a browser.
Maybe before we get Bernarda on because you kind of take a different tack from the device side, you know, what's your answer to that question? Like, what are you guys doing on the app development
So I
front?
really love what you said about it being a hydra, because it's exactly true as far as every platform has a slightly different approach to how the UX is presented, how navigation itself works, how search is exposed.
If the goal is to be everywhere.
If the goal is to be everywhere, and kind of from the strategic side, we I think have to take the approach of being everywhere, just because there is no silver bullet for OTT. One platform isn't, I don't think, sufficient to really build an audience of note. So you really do have to kind of cast a wide net and try to be on all the platforms, even if it's collecting audiences kind of in smaller pieces. So with that, we also took the approach of kind of building a core API and delivery mechanism so that we can define an information architecture and a kind of core structure that we want to have for how we organize the content on Vimeo. And then build native app experiences that respect the actual platforms themselves as much as possible within those confines. So kind of, you know, whether it's side nav or top nav or kind of those just general UX questions, we try to respect the platform wherever we can. But just the scale of effort kind of from the development side of having the right developers in place, having the right QA in place, having the right design in place, it's just a beast in its own right. But it definitely is one that I think is strategically important for building those audiences.
So Bernardo, you take the kind of the other approach. What is Roku, for example, doing to kind of help these guys out? You know, what can you do as a platform? You got 5,000 apps. How do you help them deliver?
Yeah. So yes, it's a large universe, right? I think a couple of things that have happened over the last year. It used to be that you only can publish on Roku using our SDK, and it's a BrightScript proprietary language. you needed folks that could understand, software development and developers and a large investment. All brands, NBC has 10 apps on Roku. And each of those apps has a product team and engineers, et cetera. So for sure, the investment that especially the big nets saw in the beginning with Roku and other connected devices was the attempt to still participate in this space and grow with the platform, right? Grow that side of the business. What happened as a result, though, is you have, again, 10 apps just with one piece of the brand. So there's been a movement towards consolidation of the apps themselves, right? So merging the same brands within one app versus having 5 Disney apps or Disney this, et cetera. So that piece of it, it's been sort of happening on the side of the publisher. The other thing that I've seen and what Roku actually has actively pursued is taking that barrier to entry away. So last October, we deployed something we call Direct Publisher. And Direct Publisher is basically a web portal interface where any programmer that has created an MRSS feed can plug that MRSS feed and tag it, and a Roku channel magically appears. And they can publish that. And it's very quick and easy. I mean, I can create my own channel, and I never went to engineering school. And it really is meant to decrease that barrier to entry and also being able to quick to market. Our certification process, Roku has a belief that we don't leave any customers behind, so we do not necessarily deprecate our product suite on the older devices. Thus, these guys have to pass certification across a lot of devices, not just the latest generation. And so that process takes a few more days than our competitors as a result. And so that can create a lot of pain points, especially if you're trying to push out 10 apps, right? So it really, the Direct Publisher allows you to be on the platform within 48 hours. And again, the reason that we can do that is because you're no longer manipulating the SDK, you're just using an MRSS feed that potentially is working, and that's what we're looking at, right, when we're certifying over 48 hours, is that component works. So now anybody can have, any programmer, whether you're a large net or a small niche content provider, can have a channel on Roku. And that's really, I think, one of the innovations that Roku has brought to the table. So that long tail, what we call all the different publishers and content out there, can be part of the ecosystem.
Okay. Yeah, so one of I think that raises a question that I have is, these are all really strong branded apps, right? And and from what I hear, there is going to be a desire on the part of strong brands to have those immersive apps and to continue to have strong app presence. But the question is, and it's a question for all of you, do we think the long tail, so to speak, all needs separate apps, or is it actually better for them to be kind of bubbled up to a higher level recommendation, higher level search? Is it even fair for someone who's number app 4,999 on a platform to compete, or does it make more sense to get that content kind of elevated somehow, or is that just an unanswerable question?
I think it just I think it depends on the user, right? There are folks that are no longer tied to appointment television, no longer tied to a schedule. They know what they like, right? So if you want to watch Game of Thrones, you just go find Game of Thrones wherever you can find it. So I think that there is a lot to be said about the power of some of these brands and content and folks knowing where to go get it, right? So Roku doesn't, again, we're super agnostic to specific brands or specific content pieces. We believe that it's user-driven, right? So it's still the lean-back experience. There's the concept there that people turn on television and they just want content to play. So that also is the other side of the argument, and I think it's really the programmers that have to sort of enable that, right?
Yeah. The more interesting question for me is how can a company like ours or any of ours plan for a strategy that's flexible enough when the sort of aggregation and third-party decision-making that you're talking about inevitably happens. That is going to be a component of some of what we now call OTT. Whether you want to define it as a skinnier bundle over here being sold by X company in X market, or a featured area of another app or hardware ecosystem in another market. Not even talking about stuff that's even happening here in the U.S. We're talking to companies in Malaysia where the user experience is totally divergent from what you and I would expect, but the same questions apply. And so the challenge for us is coming up with the brand value proposition where you have brands that can be strong enough to stand alone if the user experience in X market, because we're all dealing with thinking globally, is a piece of your content. And then how can you, as a programmer and as a partner to that, to that organization, pull value into richer experiences, whether those are your owned and operated experiences or highly curated, high-touch third-party experiences that you maintain, increasing the value of that user over time. That's an endpoint that's going to exist. So, we're trying to plan for that as a user eventuality as well.
I hate to use this analogy, but I can't think of something better on the fly. So it's sort of like a department store, kind of that's evolving, right? Where the Rokus and Apple TVs, they're sort of the entry level, and they will be the first discovery. They'll have shop windows and they'll merchandise certain things, algorithmically, paid, seasonally,
Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's good, right? I think that is a good general layer of curation and accessibility. And then once you enter the sort of shop-in-shop through a piece of content, then it's sort of up to the brand to deliver a continuing, exciting experience. So you might discover only one episode or one clip or one live stream, but if that is a handoff into the app, and then inside the app, we as a brand can offer something that's a little bit better than the lowest common denominator, I think that's fair. For example, for a brand like Today, we have explored sort of integrated shopping. So we've built a prototype with Amazon that was really, really ropey and really basic, but the results were quite interesting. I mean, so that could be something that is unique to the app and where people discover maybe a piece of content, but once they're in the flow, maybe there's a whole richer experience where they can do something that is transactional. So I'm very excited about this kind of interplay between the brand and the platform. I think in this particular case, if it continues down that path, that's a healthy win-win relationship.
And from a platform perspective, not to let other people talk, but from a platform perspective, I think if you're trying to build meaningful relationships with those sort of more significant content partners, then it's going to be about having a little bit of deference for that brand building up some potential energy in a customer and letting them leverage that potential energy to do something. Potential energy may be, oh my God, I just watched this amazing thing. This episode of Weedakit, I want to see the next one. And letting the platform have that natural next step happen and have the brand take advantage of that to some degree. If that's a high intent user, then let that happen. That's going to allow, that's going to allow people like me to invest further in a platform. And I think that that's the conversation that we're going to start having more and more now as I think we're going to start competing on the strength of content again, as more aggregation happens.
That's great. Will, you want to say something about that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I was starting to say something else, but then I think actually there's something there that's way better. It's the content now I think is so much more able to stand on its own, and so that's where I see Vice content coming across TVOS. There's an aesthetic and a feel to it that is unique, and so then it bubbling up through something like an Apple TV app or through the Roku kind of discovery. It's so much more able to stand on its own and draw me into an experience where then you can kind of add your brand into it, and then you can add your own kind of walled garden or your own kind of store feel. I think though for quite a lot of brands, particularly in the UGC space, where there isn't necessarily a particular thing that is like a Vimeo content, or there's not just one idea of what that could be. For us, having a unique app experience is utterly kind of essential to us being able to then kind of define what a user flow is, discovering something on Vimeo, coming across something on Vimeo. And then I think also the kind of that long tail of discovery, I think it actually is a bit of the democratization of content, where with the direct publishing, that 4,999th app that might be something with 10 subscribers, they're able to publish and then direct their people to it. So it's kind of getting to participate in this new distribution of media, even if you don't have the recognition or the marketing to establish kind of a brand or a presence that is recognizable just from a logo or an aesthetic.
That's great. So time check, I actually wanted to get to pricing models as well, but I want to open it up if people have questions before I start answering or asking mine. Fire away.
We've heard a lot about on-demand OTT, but what about live over digital video?
Yeah.
And maybe Moritz is a good...
I can take that, yeah. So we're super excited about live, especially if it's live breaking news. We actually can also open it up and make it available instantly. We have sort of like soft launched, even connected experiences where a live stream notification opens on your phone, and you can, then also signal it to be available on OTT. So we want to do a lot more around live. I know that some of the big platforms have plans to feature live streams at the curation layer. So I think that's the next frontier. I also think in terms of friction and poor user experience, like live's right up there, right? OTT, like the one thing it really doesn't deliver on, I don't think anyone, is live. Whether it's news or sports, like for all kinds of reasons. Restrictions, technology, UX. So I'm super excited to getting down that path.
Yeah, no, I would extend your excitement to even encompass, like, I'd say things that are consumed or presented as live. So we could say live and also things that are linear and presented in that fashion. I think, there was a comment earlier about the time, it takes twice as long or 3 times as long to get to a piece of content. My feeling on that stat is it's probably a mean. And if it's a mean and the thing it's competing against is television, and television has the world's most distracting thing, which is a live feed of video content, you're going to draw that number down almost immediately. So if said app probably put a live or simulated live feed up there, they'd probably cut their search time in half because people would get sucked in. Mm-hmm. I think that's a powerful UX element. Moritz and I have challenges around simulating live as part of a non-authenticated experience, especially for cable content. But there's also a lot we can do. So it's definitely something that we're thinking about. And I just for me as a person, it's incredibly sticky. Sometimes, really annoyingly so. Yeah. And it just draws my attention.
I think in audio, there's a good example of how I think it should be. If you look at the NPR One app, right, how it always launches you into a news bulletin. And it doesn't matter if you hit top of the hour or bottom of the hour. It's always the most recent, never more than 30 minutes old news bulletin. And it just transports you into this live experience with relevant content for where you are, because it's mostly local. It's national and local. So I kind of think, in video you can create a similar pathway where you open up something, it feels like live, and then you glide into a deeper content experience.
The most successful apps on Roku are actually doing the simulation, right, that you reference. And we do tell folks all the time that that's a best practice, right? Because again, the expectation is when you have a connected device to a television is that you will turn it on and it's just going to play. So, best practice, it's certainly something that we're working on to make the experience better. It's not as clean as it needs to be. And, I think for sure Roku's looking into creating more opportunities in that area.
Well, it's not just on you. It's also technologically not the easiest thing to do.
Right.
And from a user experience standpoint, it's not the most logical thing to do.
And there's a big divide, right? Many users actually hate it. So we haven't really found conclusive evidence either way. It certainly helps streams.
I'm one of those users who doesn't like, that people say it's immersive. Like, well, that's not what I wanted. And it's really hard to get that right to make sure I got what I wanted.
Well, you need to combine it with a really clean overlay menu that, while something plays, you can quickly dive into the next thing. And I think that's the kind of interesting problem to work on.
Yeah.
So here first and then here. I want to make sure you guys get it.
Thank you, Eric from Slack TV. You all mentioned that human curated content recommendation was highly valuable, but that contradicts kind of what Facebook did when they fired like 2,000 people that made recommendation, right? Only going for the algorithm recommendation. So can you help me understand what difference you have in the use case, and what's the difference?
Sure. I mean, Facebook, in their own words, is not a media company, right? And doesn't want to set a news agenda. At the end of the day, like, we are a news company, and we want to set the news agenda, and we see that's our public service.
I understand absolutely the news, but for Vimeo, for example, I mean, we have just watching.
So there, I think it's a little bit different when you're coming at it from the content perspective versus kind of coming from the social sharing perspective. With us, it's about kind of crafting a viewing experience. And there, I think there is no algorithm that can replicate, a knowledgeable curator handpicking an experience. So I would say that I at least disagree with kind of that premise of that it can all be algorithmically driven, or at least anything that I've seen, it doesn't replicate the same level of experience as someone that knows what they're doing, picking a viewing experience for you.
I will also say one thing about this type of curation. It depends what you optimize for, right? Are you optimizing for, a quantifiable engagement, or are you optimizing for like a happy user, right? Like a good user experience, a time well spent. If I go and watch Vimeo staff picks, I'm pretty certain I'm going to watch great video, right? Maybe an algorithm would have made it more sticky and would have like gave me more clickbaity content, but I would have probably walked away and thought, oh, I just wasted 10 or 20 minutes of my time.
There's also a big difference. I think these two things sound similar, but are only similar in name. There's a huge difference in the problem you're solving when you're talking about billions of potential pieces of content for a given user versus a few hundred or thousand, as we're dealing with. Like I said, oftentimes, our human intuition, just as users, says that seasonality and quality of content are so readily apparent to both the curator and the user that it's not a complicated thing to have confidence that's the best thing you can offer. Throwing it through a big algorithm it just seems redundant if you're talking about a few hundred pieces of content to choose from.
So Roku also is unique that we have advertising inside the platform that drives audience to channels, right? And channel partners can buy that advertising, and you have the ecosystem that will just deep link you into the app right away and just have you watching content. So that's somewhere where there is, less of an algorithm, but more opting in, right? So the user has clicked on that banner, and then they're redirected to the content. As a platform, it's obviously a fine line between, thinking it as a problem of, curation of content and making everybody happy versus, creating an algorithm that potentially is giving that individual user their unique experience, right? Somewhere in between, it's probably a good thing to try to get to. But, as a platform, again, we're handling 5,000 channels, right? So that's just a little bit of the universe is just big. So we're still looking into figuring that out.
All right, last question. Make it a good one, man.
Well, for Roku, what's great about it, you can have one account and it syncs all your purchases for your apps to all your devices. But is there anything in development for like parent restricted apps? So you can have some apps that are going to be restricted, but then you can still have the purchase apps. And also, do you think NBC would allow offline downloads like Netflix does offline now? Do you think in your apps, do you think you ever allow download to go?
It depends on the content. I mean, for like short form news clips, I think that's possible. Maybe also in a certain time window for full news programs. I can't speak to sports and entertainment.
So nothing.
I think for us too, it would be a complicated answer, and it's one of those thorny areas where it also is one of those thorny areas where like the reason that this content might be available and that one might not be could be confusing to a user, and you don't want to present something that is set up to be a bad user experience.
And as far as your Roku question, are you asking, just to make sure I understood, you're asking if we can segregate, even though all your app purchases go into one account, we can within that segregate the ones that are for kids or hide them?
Yeah, because I know that there wasn't any way to hide those.
Yeah.
Or just so when like the kids room, you would have the Disney room, but if you want to go down there, you guys could watch.
Yeah.
The app,
So you can
You would have to set up two different emails. That's the only way I think right now.
No, I think so. Per device, you can actually reorganize your order of the icons. So you can do that. So when you say hide them, if you're looking at the channel icons that are appearing on the front UI, you can actually organize those too and customize it. So for that device, that one screen can be only your kids' apps. Does that answer your question?
Well, I know like Plex, that you have a pin code now. You can have a pin on your Plex. Certain areas of your media content will be have a pin code for it. So it's not all shown.
I will say, generally speaking, parental controls is one of the biggest quagmires of any user experience ever. And you know, some apps don't have to deal with it, but once you get in, the number of requests for very specific little things kind of gets out of control. And I know that's a challenge for us. I'm sure it's a challenge for most. So.
Especially for TV where it's a shared device.
Yeah, it's just,
Right.
yeah, it's always really hard. Well, hey, thank you all very much for joining. It was a great discussion. And thanks for coming by and hearing the conversation. All right?
Thanks.
Thank you.
That was great.